You're standing in your manager's office at 8:47 in the morning, still smelling faintly of hospital antiseptic from the night before, and he's sliding a termination letter across the desk toward you like it's a form you simply need to sign and forget. Your name is Thaddeus Renlow, and you are 34 years old. 6 months ago, your son Barnaby was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and since then, your entire life has folded itself around a single, unbearable rhythm. Chemotherapy appointments, blood counts, fevers that send you racing to the ER at 2 in the morning, and a job you've held for 9 years that apparently no longer has room for a father whose son is fighting for his life. I understand this is difficult, your manager, a man named Corwin Pemberton, says, not quite meeting your eyes, but you've missed 11 days in the last 2 months. The warehouse can't function if we keep making exceptions. You look down at the letter, at the words excessive absenteeism, typed in a font, too clean and too indifferent for what it's actually doing to your life, and something in your chest goes very quiet and very cold, the way water goes still right before it freezes over completely. If a story about being punished for loving your child more than any job could ever demand is already sitting heavy in your chest, stay with this one, because what happens by the end of it is going to remind you that the people who show up for the ones they love are never truly invisible, even when the world tries hardest to make them feel that way. And if these stories about resilience, quiet strength, and the parents who carry more than anyone realizes matter to you, consider subscribing. This channel exists to keep telling exactly these stories, and it's people like you watching who keep them alive. You've worked at Holloway Freight and Logistics for 9 years, starting as a warehouse loader the summer after your wife, Josephine, passed away giving birth to Barnaby, an irony so cruel you've never fully found the words for it. Gaining a son and losing the woman who was supposed to raise him with you in the same impossible night. You built your entire adult life around that boy. Every promotion you turned down because it meant longer hours. Every overtime shift you picked up instead, because a warehouse loader with flexible scheduling could still make it to school. Pickup could still be home for dinner, could still tuck a small boy into bed and read him the same 3 books about dinosaurs until he knew every word by heart. You never imagined, not once in 9 years, that the very flexibility you built your life around would someday become the reason you lost everything. 11 days, you say quietly, still staring at the letter. Mr. Pemberton, those 11 days were chemotherapy appointments. I brought in the doctor's notes for every single one. Corwin shifts uncomfortably in his chair. I know, and I'm sorry about your son's situation, truly. But corporate policy is corporate policy. We've had complaints from your line supervisor about coverage gaps, and frankly, the higher-ups have made it clear they want the absenteeism numbers addressed across the board this quarter. He's 5 years old, you say, and your voice cracks slightly, despite every effort to keep it steady. He's fighting cancer. I'm not calling in sick because I don't want to be here. I'm calling in because there is nowhere else on earth I could possibly be. Corwin doesn't respond to that directly. He simply slides a pen across the desk, along with the paperwork, and says, I really am sorry, Thaddeus. If it helps, I can write you a strong reference for whatever comes next. A reference, as if 9 years of loading trucks and freezing warehouses, of covering other people's shifts without complaint, of being the guy everyone called when they needed someone reliable, could be reduced to a few sentences on letterhead, handed to you on your way out the door like a consolation prize for losing the only steady income keeping your son's medical bills from crushing you completely. You sign the papers. What else is there to do? You have a boy waiting for you at his grandmother's house, exhausted from last night's fever, and you don't have the energy left in you to fight a company that's already decided you're expendable. This is where things get harder before they get better. And they need to, because what's coming isn't going to be easy. You drive home in silence, the termination letter sitting on the passenger seat like something radioactive. And by the time you pick up Barnaby from his grandmother, Wilhelmina's house, your late wife's mother, the only family member, close enough and willing enough to help with childcare during endless hospital visits, you've composed yourself just enough to smile for him, because that's the promise you made the night Josephine died, that whatever else happened, Barnaby would never see you break. Daddy, he says, his small bald head tilted against the car window. Chemo having taken his curls months ago. Can we get chicken nuggets? Of course, buddy, you say, and you drive to the drive-thru you can no longer really afford, because some promises matter more than budgets. And Barnaby deserves at least this much normalcy on a day that took away so much of yours. Over the following weeks, you apply to every warehouse, every logistics company, every position remotely within your skill set across 3 counties. But the same problem follows you everywhere. Any job that requires reliable, full-time attendance is fundamentally incompatible with a child undergoing chemotherapy, and any job flexible enough to accommodate his treatment pays too little to cover rent, let alone the mounting medical bills that arrive weekly now like a slow, relentless tide. You sell things you never imagined selling. Your late father's tool set, Josephine's grandmother's jewelry, the truck you'd been slowly restoring in your spare time for years, a project meant for some distant future you're no longer sure you'll get to see. Wilhelmina helps where she can, but she's retired, living on a fixed income herself, and you refuse to let her sacrifice what little security she has left for your sake. The breaking point arrives on a Tuesday evening in early November, 3 weeks after your termination, when you're sitting in the hospital's financial counseling office. A woman named Adeline Fairweather reviewing your account with the particular gentle bluntness of someone who has delivered this news too many times before. "Mr. Renlow, I want to be straightforward with you," she says, sliding a printout across her desk. "Your outstanding balance is currently just over $34,000. And without consistent income or insurance coverage, we're going to need to discuss a payment plan, or potentially alternative treatment facility options." Alternative treatment facility options. You understand exactly what that phrase means, even dressed up in the softest possible language. A warning that Barnaby's care might need to move somewhere less specialized, somewhere with lower costs and likely lower survival rates for exactly the kind of aggressive leukemia your son is fighting. You sit in your car in the hospital parking garage that night for nearly an hour before you can bring yourself to drive home, your hands gripping the steering wheel, your forehead pressed against it. And for the first time since Josephine's funeral, you allow yourself to cry, not the quiet, controlled tears you permit yourself sometimes late at night after Barnaby's asleep, but something raw, something that comes from somewhere deep and exhausted and afraid. A grief not just for what might happen to your son, but for the particular, specific unfairness of having done everything right, showing up, working hard, loving fiercely, and still ending up here, in a parking garage, terrified and broke and utterly alone. This is the lowest point, and it needs to be felt fully here, because what happens next changes everything, though not in a way you could have predicted. 3 days later, a woman named Cressida Applewhite, a pediatric oncology nurse who has been caring for Barnaby since his diagnosis, notices you sitting in the family waiting area during his infusion, scrolling through job listings on your phone with an expression she's learned, over 15 years of nursing, to recognize as quiet desperation. "Mr. Renlow," she says, sitting down beside you, "can I ask what's going on? You seem like you're carrying something heavy today. You're not usually one to share your problems with near strangers. But something about Cressida's steady warmth, the same warmth she's shown Barnaby through 6 months of terrifying treatments, makes the truth spill out before you can stop it. You tell her about the termination, about the medical bills, about the parking garage, though you don't say it quite that directly, just that things have gotten harder than you know how to manage. Cressida listens without interrupting, and when you finish, she's quiet for a long moment before she says, "I think you should talk to my husband." You blink, unsure what that has to do with anything. "Your husband?" "His name is Percival Ashdown. He runs a logistics and distribution company, a fairly large one, actually based about 40 minutes from here. He's been trying to build out what he calls a family-first employment model for the past 2 years. Ever since our own daughter went through a health scare, he's been struggling to find the right people to help pilot it. I think you might be exactly the kind of person he's been looking for. You want to feel hopeful, but months of rejection have worn that particular muscle thin. I appreciate it. But I doubt any company wants to hire someone who just got fired for missing work." "You didn't get fired for missing work," Cressida says firmly. "You got fired for being a good father in a system that punishes good fathers for showing up where they're needed most. There's a difference, and I think Percival would understand that difference better than almost anyone." This is the turning point, though you don't fully believe it yet. Sitting there in that hospital waiting room with your termination letter still crumpled somewhere, in your glove compartment, Cressida makes the call herself, right there in the hallway outside the infusion room, and 2 days later, you find yourself sitting across from Percival Ashdown in his modest Unglamorous office at Ashdown Regional Distribution, a company far smaller than Halloway Freight, but clearly one built on principles you didn't know still existed in corporate America. Percival is a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, with tired kind eyes and the particular gentleness of someone who has personally sat in hospital, waiting rooms and understood, viscerally, what it costs a person to sit there. Cressida told me some of your situation, he says, but I'd like to hear it from you directly, if you're willing. You tell him everything, the 9 years at Halloway, the termination, the mounting bills, the fear that keeps you awake most nights, staring at the ceiling, doing math that never quite adds up no matter how many times you run the numbers. Percival listens intently, and when you finish, he leans back in his chair and says something you don't expect. 4 years ago, my daughter Wilhelmina was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. Not cancer, but serious enough that my wife and I spent almost a year in and out of hospitals, missing work constantly, terrified we'd lose our jobs on top of everything else. We were lucky. My previous employer was flexible, and Cressida's hospital has excellent family leave policies. But I remember thinking the whole time that no parent should have to choose between caring for a dying child and keeping the roof over that child's head. That's the whole reason I started this company. He explains that Ashdown Regional operates on a model built specifically around flexible, dignity-centered employment, guaranteed paid medical leave for family emergencies, remote scheduling options wherever roles allow it, and a policy that explicitly protects employees dealing with serious family health crises from termination over attendance, so long as documentation is provided. I have an opening in logistics coordination, Percival says. It pays more than warehouse loading. The hours are more flexible, and frankly, I need someone who understands, on a deep level, what it means to build a life around showing up for the people who need you most. I think that's you. You sit there stunned, unsure how to process an offer this generous after months of doors closing in your face. I don't have a college degree, you say. I don't have management experience. You have 9 years of reliability, work ethic, and the kind of resilience that can't be taught in a classroom, Percival says. I'll train you on the rest. This is where the resolution begins, slow and full, the way real change always unfolds. You start at Ashdown Regional 2 weeks later, and the difference is almost disorienting at first. A workplace where, when you need to leave suddenly for a fever spike or an unexpected hospital visit, your co-workers simply cover for you without resentment. Because the company culture treats family emergencies as exactly what they are. Emergencies, not inconveniences. Percival personally checks in with you every few weeks, not out of obligation, but genuine care, and slowly, the crushing weight you'd been carrying since your termination begins to lift, replaced by something you haven't felt in longer than you can remember. The sense that you're not entirely alone in this fight anymore. Barnaby's treatment continues its long, difficult course over the following months. Setbacks alongside progress. Difficult weeks alongside better ones. But for the first time since his diagnosis, you're able to be fully present through all of it without the added terror of financial collapse hanging over every decision. Ashdown Regional's insurance, combined with your new salary, allows you to finally make real progress on the medical debt, and slowly, painstakingly, the number that once felt like a life sentence starts shrinking into something manageable. Word of your story eventually reaches a local news outlet, not through anything you sought out, but because Cressida, moved by how far things have come, mentions it during an interview about pediatric oncology support services in the region. A reporter follows up, and within weeks, your story, unquietly, without any request from you for attention, becomes part of a broader piece on the gap between corporate policy and the real lives of working parents facing medical crises, Halloway Freight and Logistics, facing unexpected public scrutiny after the story runs, reaches out to you directly, not to rehire you, but with a formal apology and, more meaningfully, an announcement that they're revising their attendance policy to include documented medical leave protections for employees caring for seriously ill family members. A policy change that, while it came too late for you, will protect other parents in your exact situation moving forward. Corwin Pemberton, your former manager, calls you personally one evening, his voice heavy with something that sounds like genuine regret. I should have fought harder for you, he says. I knew it wasn't right even then. I'm sorry it took losing a good employee and some bad press to finally change things here. You accept his apology, Because you understand something now that months of hardship have taught you clearly. That most people aren't cruel by nature, just caught inside systems that reward efficiency over humanity, until something forces them to look at the actual cost of that trade-off. Barnaby, now 8 months into treatment, is responding well. His oncologist recently used the word remission for the first time, tentative but real, and you allow yourself, cautiously, to believe in a future you weren't always certain you'd get to see. You are 34 years old, and 6 months ago you lost a job for the crime of loving your son, enough to be present through the hardest fight of his young life. But that loss, devastating as it was, led you eventually to a workplace built by someone who understood exactly what you'd been carrying, and a story that quietly changed how one company treats parents facing the unimaginable. You still work at Ashdown Regional. You still drive Barnaby to his follow-up appointments, though they're less frequent now, spaced further apart as his numbers continue improving. Some evenings, when he's finally asleep, curled up in the same dinosaur pajamas he's worn through nearly every hospital stay, you sit in the quiet of your small apartment and think about how close you came to losing everything, and how strange and humbling it is that the people who finally caught you weren't the ones with the most power, but simply the ones who understood, deeply and personally, what it costs to love someone enough to show up for them no matter what. No job title is worth more than the title of dad, and no company deserves you unless it understands that showing up for your child will always come first.